The morning the great iron gates of Wrathorn Abbey opened for the magistrate, a woman in a soaked grey cloak knelt in the mud just beyond them and did not move. The rain had been falling since before dawn. It ran in threads from the spikes of the gate, from the bare arms of the autumn elms, from the brim of the woman's bonnet, and she let it. She had knelt there long enough that the cold had stopped being a thing she felt and had become a thing she was. In her two raw hands she held a folded square of oilcloth, pressed to her breast as a starving woman might press a heel of bread, and she watched the carriages roll through the gravel court with the steadiness of someone who had decided that today she would either be heard or she would die in the trying. A footman came down the avenue to send her off. He had done it twice already that week. He stopped 3 feet from her, because there was something in the set of her jaw that made the easy words die in his mouth. She did not beg. That was the thing the household would remember afterward, when they argued about her in the kitchens. She did not weep, did not clutch at his coat, did not name her hunger. She looked up at him through the rain and said, in the clean, unhurried voice of a woman who had once given orders in a house of her own, that she carried something the Duke of Wrathorn would wish to see before the magistrate finished his business, and that she would wait at his gate until he came to take it from her hands himself. The footman told her the Duke received no one. She said that she would wait. He told her the constable would be sent for. She said that she would wait. And because nothing in the rules of the house told him what to do with a beggar who would not be frightened, he went back up the avenue to fetch someone of higher rank. And that was how it began. Let me tell you, before we go further, who was kneeling in that mud, because the season had already decided, and the season was wrong. Her name was Marispel Corabel, and 11 months earlier she had been the daughter of a gentleman. Not a great one. Her father had been a surveyor and a maker of estate maps, a quiet, precise man who had spent 30 years walking the boundaries of other men's land and drawing them true, and his small competence had given her a clean house in the cathedral town of St. Crede, a pianoforte she played badly and loved anyway, and the expectation of a modest future. Then her father had taken a fever in the spring, and within a fortnight the modest future had closed like a door. The house had gone to his creditors and the pianoforte with it. By midsummer, she had learned that there is no station so respectable that it cannot become in a single bad season. A woman walking the high road with everything she owned tied in a shawl. What the season did not know, what the footman did not know, was the one thing her father had left her, that the creditors could not seize. He had left her his hands and his eye and his trade. He had taught his only child to read a survey the way other fathers taught their daughters to read music, and she could stand on any rise of ground in England and tell you where the water ran, and where a man would build, and where a man would hide a thing he did not want found. That skill had kept her from the worst of the road. It had also, 6 weeks before she knelt in the Wrathorn mud, put into her hands a folded square of oilcloth that the proudest, most formidable woman in 3 counties would have burned the abbey to the ground to destroy. That comes later. First there must be the man behind the gate. Anselm, Duke of Wrathorn, was 39 years old, and he had been a duke for 14 months, which is to say he had been a duke for exactly as long as Marispel had been poor. His father, the old duke, had died in the same wet spring and had left his son 2 things. The first was a name that opened every door in the country. The second was a ruin behind that name, so complete that no door in the country could help him. The Wrathorn fortune, the great accumulated wealth of 9 generations, the rents and the consols and the plate and the coin, was gone. Not spent, not gambled, gone, in the precise sense that a sum which should have stood in the funds did not stand there, and no man could say where it had walked to. Anselm had spent 14 months learning that a duke with empty coffers is a stranger in his own house. He had let the London servants go. He had closed the east wing. He had stood in his father's study among ledgers that balanced too neatly and told him nothing, and had learned the particular silence of a man who suspects he has been robbed inside his own walls and cannot prove the hand. He was not a cold man, whatever the county said of him. He had simply discovered that a face which gives nothing away is the only wealth a beggar duke has left, and he had spent it carefully. The county said he was proud. The old duke's heir had grown hard and shut, they said. Kept no company, would marry money or marry nothing, and a man so guarded had likely earned his troubles. To the county, the Duke of Raythorn was just a cold man rattling around a cold house, too proud to be pitied. They had decided that, and they were comfortable with it, and not one of them had stood close enough to see what his eyes did when no one was watching the door. On the morning the magistrate came, the man who walked down the avenue to deal with the beggar at the gate was not the Duke. It was his aunt. Lysandra, Dowager Duchess of Raythorn, was the widow of the old Duke's younger brother, and she had run the household since before Anselm was born. She was 60 years old, and built like a frost, upright and pale and perfectly kept, with white hair, dressed high, and a string of diamonds at her throat that she wore even at breakfast because she said a house in mourning still had standards. She had buried 2 husbands and a fortune of her own, and she had spent 14 months making herself indispensable to her nephew, with the patient devotion of a woman who understood that the surest place to stand is just behind the throne. She came down the avenue under a footman's umbrella, with her skirts lifted clear of the wet, and she looked at the kneeling woman the way one looks at a stain on a floor. One does not intend to clean oneself. She asked what the creature wanted. The footman repeated it. Maribel said it again, plainly, to the dowager's face. She had something the Duke would wish to see. She would give it to no hand but his. The dowager smiled. It was a smile Maribel would learn to dread, the smile of a woman who has decided the matter and is only being kind enough to inform you. There is no Duke for the likes of you, the dowager said, her voice as smooth as the whetstone. There are only the gates, and the road, and a constable I shall now send for. She turned to go. And to the footman, in a clear, carrying aside, meant for the woman to hear, she said, Look at her. A beggar, with a story. They all have a map to a fortune. These ones. It is always a map. Give them bread and they will sell you the moon. It was the first of the 3 times that label would be laid against her, and each time it was spoken, it cost her something she could not get back. She did not answer it. She knelt in the mud and let the dowager walk away, and she watched the windows of the abbey. And at the second-floor library, a curtain moved. Only that. A curtain drawn back 2 inches by a hand. She could not see, held a moment, and let fall. She did not yet know whose hand it was. She marked the window. All the same, the way her father had taught her to mark anything that moved against a still field, and she set herself to wait. She waited until dark. The rain stopped near 4, and the cold came down clean and hard after it, and still she knelt because she had nowhere on this earth to go that was warmer than the place where the thing in her hands might still be wanted. The household went to its supper, and lights moved behind the curtains. And a little after the abbey clock struck 7, a side door opened, and a man came across the court toward her alone, carrying no umbrella, his bare head dark in the lantern light, and stopped on the far side of the gate. He did not open it. He looked at her through the bars for a long moment, and she looked back, and neither of them spoke. He was tall and held himself very straight in a plain dark coat with no diamonds anywhere on him, and his face was a face that had been taught to show nothing, and had nearly forgotten how to stop. Gray eyes, the gray of slate underwater. A hard jaw with a faint old scar through the left brow, white as a thread, a mouth held level by long practice. He asked her name. She told him. He asked what she carried. She said she would tell that to the Duke of Raythorn and to no other living soul. I am the Duke of Raythorn, he said. His voice was low and level and gave nothing. Now, you have told no one. Tell me. And Maribel Corabel, who had knelt at his gate for 11 hours, who had not eaten since the previous noon, who had rehearsed this moment on every cold mile of the road, found that her carefully ordered words had deserted her, and she said only the truth, the bare thing itself, the way you confess a fire. Your fortune was not lost, she said. It was taken, and the man who took it left a record of where he put it, because a thief who steals from a duke must be able to find it again. My father drew that record, and I am the only soul left alive who can read it." The Duke of Raythorn did not move. His hand, which had been resting easy on the cold iron of the gate, closed around the bar slowly until the knuckles whitened, and held there, and that was all the answer she needed that he had heard her. He looked at the oilcloth in her hands, and at her face, white and set in the lantern light. Then he took a key from his own pocket, and unlocked his own gate with his own hands, and held it open. "Come inside," he said. "You will eat something first." She rose. Her knees would not hold her at once, and she put a hand to the gate to steady herself, and his hand came up as if to take her elbow, then stopped, half a foot from her arm, and did not. He stepped back instead to let her pass. She had seen it, though. The lifted hand, the check, the discipline of it. The body says what the mouth will not. Her father used to tell her of men reading water, and she filed it away with the curtain at the window. 2 small, true things in a house full of polished lies. What she did not know, walking up the avenue beside the silent Duke, was that the curtain at the library window 6 hours earlier had been moved by him. He had stood at that glass and watched a woman kneel in the rain at his gate and refused to be frightened by his aunt, and had felt, for the first time in 14 months, something stir in him that was not grief and was not calculation. He had told himself it was the oilcloth. He was not yet ready to know it was the woman. They put her in the small parlor off the kitchens where the housekeeper, Mrs. Tamsey, kept her own fire, and Mrs. Bedia. Tamsey, who had served the old Duke 40 years and wept at his grave and trusted exactly no one who had come after, looked the drowned woman over once and decided things she did not say. She brought broth and bread and a dry shawl and stood by while Marysbell ate, slowly, carefully, the way the truly hungry eat, when they have learned that the body will rebel at sudden plenty. The Duke had gone to deal with the magistrate. The Dowager, Mrs. Tamsey said, had been told the beggar was sent away and had gone up satisfied to her rooms. She said this last with the smallest flattening of her mouth, and Marysbell understood that she had been handed, very quietly, an ally. How the fortune had been taken was a thing the Duke meant to know, and the next morning Marysbell told him in the library, with the door shut and Mrs. Tamsey set outside it to turn away any who came. She unfolded the oilcloth on the great table. Inside was not a map, as a child draws a map. It was a survey, her father's survey, a sheet of fine paper covered in his small exact hand in lines and figures and the close hatching of contour, and across the lower third of it a band of what looked like nonsense, columns of letters in no language, the whole bordered by a chain of tiny pictures, a key, an oak, a fish, a bell. "The man who came to my father 2 years ago," she said, "gave a false name and a true commission. He wanted the cellars and outbuildings of a great house surveyed and recorded. Every wall and drain and disused passage in confidence, for a master he would not name. My father took the work because we needed it, and because surveying a house is no crime. He did not know what he had drawn until afterward, when the news came that the Raythorn fortune had vanished, and the dates lined up like a closing seam. He understood then that he had drawn the hiding place of stolen gold, and that the chain of pictures along the border was a cipher the thief had asked him to set into it, so that a man who knew the order could find the spot, and a man who did not would see only an ornament. He taught me that order on the last clear day before the fever took his mind. The cipher names the place. The place itself is somewhere in this house, Your Grace, and only the survey says which wall." The Duke looked at the sheet for a long time. Then he asked the question she had been waiting for and dreading, because the whole of her credibility hung on her answer. He asked why she had not simply taken it to a magistrate. Why a Duke's gate? Why him? "Because the man who commissioned my father," she said, "paid him in coins stamped with the Raythorn arms, and signed the receipt with the steward's flourish, and was let in and out of your cellars by someone who held your keys. The thief did not break into this house. He was already inside it. A magistrate would have sent word to the household to make inquiry, and the inquiry would have reached the thief before it reached you. and the survey and I would both have been quietly disposed of. You are the only person in England who cannot be the thief, because the thing was stolen from you. So I came to your gate. It was sound. He knew it was sound. And the cold Duke of Raythorn sat down across the table from a beggar he had fed the night before, and pulled the lamp closer, and said, his voice level, "Show me how it is red." So began 3 weeks that neither of them ever afterward spoke of without their voices changing. By day the house ran on as it had, the dowager at its head, the steward Mr. Carradine moving through it with his ring of keys and his soft, attentive manner, the rival they were quietly preparing for Anselm. Lady Sabrienne Dreno, riding over twice in those weeks, with her mother, to take tea and be admired. By day, Marispel was a poor relation taken in out of charity, given a plain room in the servants' wing kept to the back stairs, a story the dowager accepted because it cost her nothing, and confirmed her low opinion. By night, in the locked library, a duke and a surveyor's daughter bent together over a sheet of cipher and learned the shape of each other's silences. She taught him to read the contour the way her father had taught her, the slow grammar of high ground and low. And he was quicker than she expected, and there was a pleasure in watching a guarded man forget to guard himself over a thing that interested him. He brought the old house plans up from the muniment room, and they matched her father's survey against the abbey's true walls, room by room, looking for the place where a cellar in the cipher answered to a cellar in the stone. He told her in pieces what 14 months of quiet ruin had been. She told him what the road had been. Neither said the larger thing. His hand learned the trick all the same of being near hers on the table and not touching it, a half-inch of charged air held by main force, and once reaching for the same corner of the sheet, his bare fingers brushed the back of her raw hand and both of them went still as struck glass. And neither moved away as fast as propriety required. The body says what the mouth will not. It was Mrs. Tamsey who first warned her. "The steward asks about you," she said one evening, setting down a candle. "Mr. Carradine. He asks the maids what you do, where you go, whether you go to his grace at night. He smiles when he asks. I do not like a man who smiles while he counts." And Marispel understood that the soft, attentive steward with the ring of keys, the man whose hand had let the thief in and out of the cellars, had begun to feel the floor move beneath him, and was looking for the cause. She told the Duke. He had already known. Carradine had served the house 20 years, had been the old Duke's man, had handled every payment and every key, and was the one human being in the abbey who could have walked stolen gold out of a cellar without a single lock being forced. Carradine had not done it alone, though a steward does not decide on his own to rob the house he serves. A steward is given leave, and the only person in Raythorn Abbey who could give a steward leave, who had run the household for 40 years and held its purse before Anselm was breached and after, who had wept no tears at the old Duke's grave that anyone had seen, was the woman who wore diamonds at breakfast. He did not say it aloud. He said only that they must find the place before the household understood they were looking. Once they held the proof, it could not be moved. Until they held it, they were two people who could be made to disappear. She had come to his gate with nothing but a skill and her father's name and the truth, and he had not asked her to be beautiful or grand or anything but exactly what she was. He had asked her to read, and she had. They were close, the night it broke, closer than they had yet let themselves be. They had matched the cipher's third figure to a sealed cellar, beneath the disused chapel, a space the old plan showed and the new ones had quietly forgotten, and Marispel had stood up from the table with her father's survey in her hand, and her face bright with the near end of a long road. And the Duke had looked at her in the lamplight and said her given name. Not Miss Corabel, not the creature, not the beggar, not the story. Marispel. He said it once, low, as if testing whether he was allowed, and the sound of it in his level voice undid something in her that the cold and the hunger and the long road had not been able to touch. And then the library door opened without a knock, and the Dowager Duchess of Raythorn stood in it with a candle, and behind her shoulder the steward Carradine. And the matter was no longer theirs alone. The dowager did not shout. That was the worst of it. She came into the room as if she owned the air in it, and she looked at the survey on the table, and at the two of them standing too near each other in the lamplight, and she assembled the scene into exactly the shape that would damage Marysbell most and cost herself least. "So this is the charity case," she said. "The drowned beggar from the gate, now closeted by night with the Duke over papers." She let the word hang. "Papers," she said again, softly, as if it pained her. "A map to a fortune. I told you at the gate, nephew. They always have a map. I did not think even you would be fool enough to let her into the house to play it out." It was the second voicing, landing in a public exchange, the steward witnessing. Two footmen now drawn to the open door, crafted to make Marysbell a schemer and Anselm a dupe. And it was very good. Marysbell watched the Duke's face and saw it close, saw the old taut blankness come down over whatever had been in it a moment before when he had said her name, and she understood that the dowager had just done to him in one sentence what 14 months of grief had done, made him a man who could not afford to be seen to feel. He did not throw her out. He said, level and quiet, that the papers were a state business, and the hour was late, and they would all speak in the morning, and he had Marysbell escorted to her room. And the dowager, who had expected either a denial or a banishment and received neither, understood for the first time that the floor had moved under her as well, and went up the stairs that night and did not sleep, and began in the cold, competent way of a woman who has run a great house for 40 years, to plan. She did not waste a day. By the following noon, a story was abroad in the household, and on its way to the county, that a known adventuress, a vagrant, turned from the gate for begging, had wormed into the abbey, and was working upon the grief-struck Duke with a forged paper and a tale of buried treasure. By evening, the steward Carradine had produced from the very muniment room where the old plans were kept a second survey on aged paper, in a hand made to resemble her father's, showing the same cellars but bearing along its border, not the true cipher, but a false one, dated to the year the fortune vanished. His could be set beside it, and the two would cancel. One true, and one forged, and no honest man able to swear which was which. The dowager and her steward did not sit and hope to be lucky. They moved. They built a wall around the lie, and they manned it, and the cruelest stroke was the simplest. The dowager went to her nephew, alone, in his father's study, and she did not rage. She wept. She told him she had loved his father and loved him, that she had given 40 years to keeping this house standing, while the world laughed at its empty rooms, that it broke her heart to see him made a fool of in his own grief by a clever beggar, and that she asked only one thing, that he protect the family's name by sending the woman away before the county made a jest of the house of Raythorn forever. She was in that hour entirely sincere, and that was what made her formidable. She was not lying about the love. She had simply built her whole long life inside an order that could not measure a surveyor's daughter, and she would defend that order to the last stone, and she believed every cruel word of it was kindness. For 3 days the Duke did not come to the library. Marysbell kept to her room, and felt the house turn against her, felt the maids go silent when she passed, felt the broth come later and colder, and knew the shape of what was being built without being told. She had been here before, and knew how a season decided a woman. On the third evening, Mrs. Tamsey came to her with her mouth flat and her eyes wet, and told her the thing that broke the back of her hope. "There is to be a gathering," she said. "The county families. The Drenos. His Grace is to announce his engagement to Lady Sabrienne Dreno, and the dowager has let it be known that the unfortunate business of the beggar and her forged map will be settled the same evening before witnesses, so the matter is closed and the family clean." This was the dark moment, and it was very dark. He had said her name. She had let herself for 3 weeks be a woman with a future again, and the season had closed its door a second time, and this time it had a duke's hand on the latch. She heard the third voicing of the label that night, and she heard it from his own house turned against her. A maid, not cruelly, only repeating what was said below, told her in the corridor that the steward had it from the dowager herself, and the dowager had said it cool as you please at supper. The beggar at the gate, she had said, had held a map to the Duke's fortune, exactly as such creatures always do, and now the map would be shown, for the forgery it was, and the beggar shown the road. The maid reported it as a kitchen, reports any news, and went on with her candle. And Marysbell stood in the cold corridor of a house that was about to cast her out, and understood that she had been right about one thing on the road, the worst thing. There is no station so respectable it cannot become in a single bad season, a beggar at a gate. Here is what the dowager, for all her 40 years of running the house, had failed to weigh. She thought the survey was the danger, and that if she could discredit the paper, she could discredit the woman, and she had built a beautiful forgery to do it. She had never once considered that the danger was not the paper at all. It was that the surveyor's daughter could read what no one else alive could read, and that a forged cipher, however well aged, would mean nothing set before the one person on earth who knew the true order of a key, an oak, a fish, a bell. There was a second thing the dowager had not weighed, which was the Duke himself. For 3 days Anselm had let the house believe he was bending. He had let his aunt weep in his father's study and said nothing to comfort or refuse her. He had let the engagement be arranged around him, had gone cold and quiet and shut, exactly as the county expected, and exactly as his grief had taught him, and the whole house had read it as surrender. A man who has spent 14 months learning to show nothing has learned, also, how much can be done behind a face that shows nothing. He had not been bending. He had sent on the first of those 3 silent days, by a groom named Sturgis, whom Mrs. Zack Tamsey swore by for a slow, careful solicitor named Wisbeck in St. Crede, the late surveyor's old friend, who had known Marysbell since she was a child, and had kept in his strong box the dead man's own letters. He had set in motion quietly the one thing that could turn a forged paper into dust. He had simply not told the woman he was protecting, because he could not bear, until he was certain, to give her a hope the dowager might yet take away. The gathering was held in the Long Gallery, because the Long Gallery was where the House of Raythorn had always rendered its verdicts. The county came in its autumn finery, candlelight on bare shoulders and good cloth, the Drenos at the front, Lady Sabrienne, in pale rose-looking, it must be said, exactly as she had been told her whole life she was, the correct and obvious and natural choice. The dowager stood near the great fireplace in her diamonds, perfectly kept, perfectly certain, the steward Carradine at the edge of the crowd with both surveys, in a leather folder under his arm. Ready. And Marysbell was brought in at the last, in the plain grey gown she had arrived in, washed now, but still plainly the gown of the woman from the gate, because the dowager had judged that the contrast would do half her work for her. She was placed where everyone could see her, and she stood where she was put. She had decided on the road long ago that whatever they did to her, she would do it standing, and she stood. The dowager opened it. She was gracious. She thanked the company for their friendship to a house in a difficult season, and spoke of grief and of the duty of a family to protect itself from those who prey on grief, and she had Carradine bring forward the leather folder, and lay the 2 surveys side by side on a draped table where the candlelight fell on them. "A beggar," she said, her voice carrying the length of the gallery, "a vagrant turned from our gate for begging, who returned with a forged map and a tale of buried gold, and very nearly worked it upon the Duke himself in his sorrow. Here is her map, and here, found in our own muniment room, is the survey it was copied from, the genuine article, by which the forgery stands exposed." She let the silence work. She turned to Marysbell with the smile from the gate. "Have you anything to say?" she asked. "Before the company, before you were taken to the road, where you were found." The gallery was very quiet. A duke who could not afford to be seen to feel stood near the fireplace, with his face giving nothing, and the woman from the gate looked at the 2 papers on the table, and at the dowager and at the watching county that had already decided, and she did the only thing she had ever known how to do, which was to be exactly what she was. She did not defend herself. She walked to the table. She looked down at the two surveys, her father's true one and the steward's clever forgery, and let the company watch her look, and then she said, in the clean, unhurried voice she had used at the gate, that her ladyship was correct, that one of these was genuine and one was false, and that she could prove which, in the space of a minute before them all, by a thing no forger could have copied, because no forger had known to ask. Her father had been a maker of estate maps for 30 years, and every map he drew carried, hidden in the border ornament, a thing he called his signature, set in a cipher of small pictures, in an order he taught to no one but his daughter. On the true map, the order of the figures spells a place. On the false one, it spells nothing, because the man who copied the border copied the pictures and could not copy the order, for he did not know it existed. Let the Duke read the order on each. The map that names a place is the true one. The map that names nothing is the lie. And she turned to Anselm and held out her father's pencil, which she had carried from the gate, and asked him to do, before witnesses, the thing he had learned in 3 weeks of locked nights, to read the cipher aloud. It was the calibrated thing, and it was his to do. He crossed the room. The whole gallery watched the cold Duke of Raythorn cross the floor to the beggar from the gate and take a dead man's pencil from her hand. He bent over the two surveys. On the steward's forgery he set the pencil to the small pictures in the order Marispel had taught him, key, oak, fish, bell, and read off the letters they marked. And they made nothing, a stumble of consonants gibberish, and the gallery heard it make nothing. Then he moved to her father's, and set the pencil to the same chain in the same order, and read off the letters. And this time they made a word, and the word was a place in his own house, the old sealed cellar beneath the disused chapel, named plainly for anyone to hear. He straightened. He looked at his aunt across the bright table, then turned to the assembled county, and said the short, true thing he had come there to say, 12 words, no more, in the same arena where the verdict had been meant to fall. Well, this is no forgery. This woman is no beggar. She is my surveyor. He did not say wife. He did not need to yet. He had named her by what she was and what she could do. In front of the people gathered to unname her. And in that gallery, it landed harder than any declaration of love, because it could not be argued with. A man may be a fool for a pretty face. No man is a fool for a thing he has just watched, proven before his own eyes. The dowager understood, in that instant, that she had lost. It was the single hinge of clear feeling the narration allows her, and it was not triumph she felt, and not even fear. It was the cold recognition of a woman whose script had worked in every room she had ever entered, and did not work in this one. She reached, all the same, for the last card. She said the forgery had been found in the muniment room, that the steward could swear to it, that this was some trick of pencils, and the company should not be gulled. And the Duke, Level still said that the company need not take pencils on faith, and had the doors at the end of the gallery opened, and an old man came in. Wisbeck of Sancreed was 74, and walked with a stick, and he had known the surveyor 30 years, and his daughter since she could walk, and he carried in his careful hands a packet of letters in the dead man's own writing, kept in his strong box these 11 months. He laid them by the surveys. The hand was the same as the true map, and not the same as the forgery, and any man might see it. And in one of those letters, written in the spring before the fever, the dying surveyor had set down plainly that he feared he had been made the tool of a theft, that his work on a great house had been commissioned through a steward's hand and paid in coin bearing a great family's arms, and that he had hidden his own cipher in the border, so that if the truth were ever needed, his daughter could speak it. The letter named no house. It did not have to. The coin had borne the Raythorn arms, and there was only one steward in the gallery with a leather folder under his arm, and every eye in the room found Carradine at once. The steward did not stay to be questioned. He went out a side door and was gone before the constable could be sent, and that was its own confession, and the county read it. And the Dowager Duchess of Raythorn stood alone by the fireplace, in her diamonds, deserted by her instrument, exposed not as a monster, but as what she was. A proud old woman who had built her life inside an order and had robbed her own house to keep the order standing, and who now must watch the whole county understand it. She did not weep this time. She fragmented. She said only twice that she had done it for the family, that everything she had ever done, she had done for the family, the words coming smaller the second time, and no one in the gallery answered her, and the silence answered her instead. Anselm did not destroy her. The shape of his nature would not let him, and neither, in the end, would Marysbell. He did not have her dragged before a magistrate to be hanged for a thief, though the law would have allowed it. He stripped her of the keys and the management she had held for 40 years, gave her a small, clean settlement and a small, clean house, far enough from the abbey that her presence would not poison it, and required of her only that she go, and live quietly, and never again render a verdict in a Wraithorn room. It was displacement, not vengeance, the exact unmaking of a woman who had overreached, and not 1 inch beyond it. As she went from the gallery, past the woman she had called a beggar at the gate, she paused, and looked at Marysbell, and something crossed her frosted face that was almost, not quite, the beginning of knowing she had been wrong about what worth was and where it lived. She did not say it. It crossed her face all the same, and Marysbell, who did not gloat, inclined her head to her as one lady to another, and let her pass. They opened the sealed cellar beneath the disused chapel the next morning. The cipher had named it true. Behind a false wall the survey had marked and the new plans had forgotten. In stout iron-bound chests the steward had carried down over 2 slow years, a strong box at a time, was the Wraithorn fortune, 9 generations of it, the rents and the plate and the coin, not lost, not spent. Only hidden by a man who meant one day to take it out into the world as his own. It came back into the light because a surveyor had taught his daughter to read the ground, and his daughter had knelt 11 hours in the rain, rather than let the truth go unspoken, and a cold duke had unlocked his own gate with his own hand. Lady Sabrienne went home with her mother that same night, and it must be said for her that she went without scene or spite. She had been told her whole life that she was the correct choice, and she had believed it the way one believes the weather. And she discovered in the gallery, watching a duke cross a room to a woman in a gray gown, that being correct and being chosen are not the same thing. No one had ever looked at her the way the Duke of Wraithorn had just looked at the surveyor's daughter. She was not cruel about it. She was only quiet on the long drive home, and she was kinder, afterward, to plain women than she had been before. Anselm came to her in the library where it had all begun, on the evening the last chest was carried up. The survey lay on the table between them, where it had lain for 3 weeks. He did not make her a speech. He had never been a man for speeches, and she would not have believed one. He stood across the table from her, and he said that he had called her his surveyor in the gallery because it was true, and because the truth was, the only weapon he had trusted in 14 months, that it was not the whole of what she was to him, and that he had known it the first hour at the gate. He had nothing to offer her that a sensible woman would want. He said a house that had been a ruin until yesterday, and a name the county had been laughing at, and he was asking. Anyway, he asked her to stay. He asked her to be the lady of the house she had given back to him. He used her given name again, and this time there was no door to open and no one to interrupt, and he let it stand in the quiet between them as long as it wished to stand. She did not answer at once. She had learned on the road not to spend hope before it was earned, and she stood with her raw hands flat on her father's survey and let herself be sure. Then she told him the truth, plainly and without ornament, as she had told him the truth at the gate, that she had nothing either, that she came to him a beggar with a dead man's map and the clothes she stood in, and that she would marry him not because he was a duke, but because he had unlocked a gate in the dark for a kneeling stranger, when his own house told him to send for the constable, and a man who would do that was a man worth a cold walk and a long wait. She put her hand in his. He had not in 3 weeks let himself take it. He took it now, both his hands closing over her raw fingers, careful as if she were the thing in the house most worth protecting, and she let him. And that was the whole of it. and it was enough. They were married in the small grey church at Coldridge in the dead of winter, quietly. Mrs. Tamsy weeping in the front pew, old Wisbeck giving the bride away on his stick, the groom Sturgis grinning at the back, and the county came, and the county behaved, and the dowager did not come and was not spoken of. The fortune that had been hidden, built nothing, showy. Anselm reopened the east wing, put the London servants back in their places, and paid every debt the old Duke had left. And then, because his wife asked it, he settled a sum in a small school in Sancreed, where the children of tradesmen might learn their letters and their figures, and, if they had the eye for it, the reading of the land, so that what a surveyor had taught one daughter might be taught to others, and her father's trade would outlast his name. By the following spring, the abbey was a house again, and not a ruin pretending to be one, and on a fair afternoon in May, the new Duchess of Raythorn stood at the second-floor library window, the same window where a curtain had once moved 2 inches in the rain, and looked down at the iron gates her husband had unlocked for her with his own hand. They stood open now in the soft afternoon light, the way they had not stood open in many a long month of locks and grief, the elms beyond them green at last. Her father's survey hung framed on the library wall behind her, not a map to a fortune anymore, but the thing it had always most truly been. A father's last gift, a daughter's trade, the proof that a man may draw the truth so carefully that it waits 11 months in an oilcloth to set a wrong thing right. She did not need it for anything. Now, she kept it, because it had brought her here. Anselm came and stood beside her at the glass, not touching her, only near. The half-inch of charged air he had once held by main force across a table, now simply the easy nearness of a married man beside his wife. He looked, where she looked, at the open gate. He said nothing. He had learned from her that the most weighted things are best said in silence with the body. And she had learned from him that a man's stillness can be a kind of tenderness, rather than a kind of cold. Below them, the groom Sturgis led a horse across the gravel, and the elms were in full leaf, and the gate stood open, and a woman who had once knelt 11 hours in the mud beyond it, now stood warm and dry, and chosen at the window above, and watched the road she had come in on, and was not afraid of it any longer. She put her hand on the cold stone of the sill, where the light was warming it. He covered it with his own. Outside, the gate stayed open. Inside, the fire burned low and good in the grate, and the long, quiet afternoon went on, and neither of them, for once in their guarded lives, had anything left to guard. If the journey of the surveyor's daughter has stayed with you to the end, I am glad you stayed for it, and I hope you carry with you the small, true thing she carried in her raw hands all that long, cold way. That worth does not stop being worth, because the world has not yet troubled to look.